So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Anil Menon, who's the Global President of Cisco Smart and Connected Communities. Anil.
Good morning. Can you hear me if I just leave this down here? Or do I need to pick it up? Because you see, I have this problem. I talk with my hands. So, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. So, Zach, thank you for inviting me. And I think this is, the first thing I want to say is what particularly excited me when they asked me would I come and speak here is the fact that it's in Kentucky. Not because of bourbon. Because I just finished watching Justified. I think this is the best show I've ever seen, ever. I don't know if anyone of you have seen it. If you have not, watch it. You will not stop watching the damn thing. I'm at the airports in London watching it. I'm in Dubai watching it, everywhere. Anyway. Having said that, that's not the reason I came here. I came here because it's a regional conference. I have spoken, I have met with mayors globally, but for me this is particularly interesting because I think this is the way to go going forward. Big cities like Chicago and London and Barcelona will figure it out. They have their own problems, and they're not necessarily going to take what is needed in regions like what you have here. So what I'm going to do in my 30 minutes is I want to talk to you a little bit about, I am with Cisco, and so I want to start by saying I'm going to give you our experiences, best practices, what we learned, and I have been driving this for Cisco for 7-8 years now. And I remember when we started talking about smart cities, there would be a few mayors who got it, but very often most of the others would say, go talk to our CIO. That's not the case anymore. So I do want to talk to you a little bit about, we don't call our business, I don't call my business smart cities. I call it smart connected communities. And there's a reason for that, so I'm going to start with that. And the first one I want to say is the good news for me and my business is that fact that today when I go to a mayor or a deputy mayor or a Department of Transportation, they get it. They say, yes, I want to talk to you about smart cities. But my biggest disappointment is that smart cities has become all about technologies. So I'm going to start out by saying, which you're going to be surprised to hear, smart city has nothing to do with technology. In fact, I would argue that smart cities, smart region is too important to be left to us technology people. We will screw it up. So I'm going to start with the point that I keep bringing up. I'm going to take the example of not the current mayor or the former mayor, the first mayor. We worked with 3 mayors in Barcelona in their evolution of Smart Barcelona. And I remember the first time, because there's no common definition of smart cities, by the way. You go and talk to a mayor in Japan about smart cities, it's totally different than the mayor of Copenhagen and the mayor, I would argue, of Detroit or some other area that you have. So I do remember talking to Mayor Hero, and I said, smart city, this is what we're doing. He said, look, I don't understand smart cities, but let me tell you what I want. For me, smart city means my people should be able to dance in the streets of Barcelona. First I thought he was kidding. He says, no, seriously. Think through why and how I can get more people to dance in the streets of Barcelona. If you watch the video that he put out on Smart Barcelona, it shows people dancing on the streets of Barcelona. Now, if you think about that, you address all the issues about lighting traffic differently. Because in order to have people dance in the streets of Barcelona, you need to have open streets where people can dance without getting hit by cars. Or in the evening where it is safe to dance because there's light. Or that they have no garbage problems. So actually what we did in Barcelona, because of that dance in the streets of Barcelona, was we put sensors in the garbage bins to make sure that when it starts smelling, it sends a signal back to come pick up this garbage can. So that there's no stink to say, oh, I don't want to dance here. You should be able to dance anywhere. Now, so this is where I come back and I say smart cities is about the soul of the city. And you start with the soul of the city. You go into a Mexico City, it is not that pretty compared to Paris. But I love Mexico City because of the energy, the vitality of Mexico City. So if you start with the soul of the city, you have captured the culture, you have captured the history, you have captured the aspirations, you have captured the current conditions, and then your smart city can be explained to what the deputy mayor told me is, tell me how do I explain what we're doing to my 82-year-old mother. If you can't explain that, you're not doing anything smart. You're doing technology, but it's not smart. So I do want to start with the idea and the point that the smart city, whatever we do, has to start from the citizens in back. An engagement with the citizens. So I'm going to come back to some of the lessons that we learned, some of my thinking, and so I will tell you this, that this is like that book that said the unbiased look at the Civil War, the Southern perspective. I can say that in the South. But this is an unbiased look in the sense that based on our experiences, based on the projects that we have done globally, and I still remember, I'm seeing one of my former colleagues here, Hardik Bhatt, who worked for me, then went back to Illinois and became the CIO for the state of Illinois, and then ran Smart Illinois programs for the governor, and now he has left and gone to work for a small company called Amazon. But I remember when we met with the deputy governor of Jakarta, I was meeting with him and he said, look, I don't have a CIO. I don't have anybody who's going to help me think through it. Can you help me? So I said, sure. You know, the former CIO of Chicago now works for me. I'm going to ship him off to you. So poor guy was on flights, nonstop going to Jakarta as the CIO for Jakarta on a pro bono basis. But when you think about it, we have worked in Jakarta, we have worked all these places, so we have made mistakes along the way. So I just want to tell you what worked, what did not work, and since we're starting out, we should think about it. I would argue that in this journey for smart, and I'm going to now take a technology, having predicated the point that don't start with technology, we have to start with standards and government regulations. I'm going to come back to that. But I am going to go to technology because that's our expertise. So let me just start with technology and thinking through how we think through these things. If you think about Europe, the cities in Europe were far along compared to American cities. They started the journey many, many years ago, over a decade back. Now, what is interesting is if you look at the work that we have done in Europe versus the work that we're doing in Latin America or the work that we're doing in Asia, and especially developing countries, there's a very different trend. In Europe, most of the projects, most of the cities, most of the work that we do is around quality of life. They rarely talk about economic development. Rarely. It's about quality of life. How do I improve the quality of life for my citizens? It's about the environment pollution. It's about improving lifestyle, like dance on the streets. You get into Jakarta, you get into Mumbai, you get into Mexico, you get into any cities there, it's all about standard of living. Developing countries focus on standard of living. How do I create middle class? How do I give more access to healthcare? How do I give more access to jobs, to improve the quality and living standards? Now when you come to America, I would argue that America has been on the smart cities journey only in the last 3 years or 4 years. It's mostly all about economic development, attracting talent, attracting investments. Yes, sustainability is important. Yes, lifestyle is important, but the founding start is I have budget limitations, figure out a way for me to do this on a different model. So we have to think about the starting point as to which things should you do, which is why lighting is so popular, because lighting is a cost reduction. And parking is extraordinarily important in America because it's a second or the third source of revenue for cities. And yet 40% of all parking spaces are empty because you don't know where they are. So I want to talk when you talk about smart cities or smart regions or smart communities, it's extraordinarily important that we start by saying it's all about sustainability, and there are 3 dimensions of sustainability. The first one is economic sustainability. You do want a vibrant economy. The other one is environmental sustainability. And the third one is social sustainability, the social fabric. You don't want to do something that is not going to be consistent. I forget who's the one who spoke here, that each of the regions will have different needs and different ability to absorb these technologies. So the social sustainability becomes an extraordinarily important one. Now, one of the interesting things that I see, we have seen globally, is that today 10,000 people are moving from a rural area into an urban area every hour of the day. 10,000. This is in Asia, Latin America, Africa. In America, from 2000 to 2017, urbanization has increased by 20%, 19.8%. So it's even America, which is over 80% of urbanization, it's still happening. Now, 10,000 people per hour means we have to build one London every month for the next 36 years to keep up with urbanization. And we're not going to be able to do that doing the same old thing. This is why you're going to continue to see migration problems in Europe, because people are going to leave. They're not leaving because they want to leave their families behind. They're leaving because of lack of access to healthcare, education, jobs, and culture. So as technologists, the question we should be asking is, if we could use a digital platform to enable solutions around healthcare and education and jobs into rural areas, can we then change the dynamics of movement and migration? Because otherwise, you will continue to have this. And by the way, one of the most interesting things that I get to see is you go to Austria, you have a 31-year-old guy who's now the chancellor. You go to Indonesia, you see the same challenge. You go to Australia, 6 prime ministers in 8 years. You go into UK with Brexit. You come to America with the challenges we are facing today. You go to Netherlands. You go to Indonesia. You go to India. You go to Malaysia. I just came back from Malaysia. Same story everywhere. It's all about, I don't want foreign-looking people here. I have economic insecurity. I have job insecurity. I have pollution insecurity. These are common standards of urbanization, and we have to fix it, because if you don't fix it, it is going to keep getting worse. This is where we are the solution in regions, because big cities can't take this anymore. More than 3 times the movements are going to go into smaller cities, 2nd tier, 3rd tier size cities. That is where the vibrancy is going to be. That is where the opportunity is going to be. That is where what you're doing here becomes extraordinarily important. So let me just take up by saying, how do we think about solutions, technology solutions? So I'm going to ask you this question. What if you had unlimited computing at a reasonable price? What if you had unlimited storage at a reasonable price? What if you had unlimited bandwidth at a reasonable price? What if everything was connected to everything? Would you do healthcare the same way? Would you do education the same way? Would you build buildings the same way? Would you run your cities the same way? Would you live your lives the same way? And I'm going to put on the next layer. The internet is changing. Over the next few years, the internet is going to be all video-based. And that is going to even transform our lives even more. Just to give you a context, Cisco, and the reason why we can say that is over 75 to 80% of the worldwide internet traffic goes through a Cisco router or a switch. So we have visibility to it. Now, we don't read your emails. We leave that to the NSA. Is there press here? That was off the record and completely a Menon statement, okay? I want a job when I go back to San Jose. But on a more serious note, we have, this is an important fact that I think we should think about as we're doing traffic and water and all the other solutions. So we do something called the VNI, which is the Visual Networking Index. And if you have not read it, please download it. It's freely available. We monitor worldwide internet traffic and why and where is it going. Here's a statistic that boggles my mind. In 2012, 20 American families loaded onto the internet the same amount of traffic as the entire global internet traffic of 2008. And our estimate is that by 2020, 1 American family will load onto the internet more traffic than the entire global internet traffic of 2008. 1 family. And that's not because they're loading on Gangnam-style videos or dancing puppies and kittens. It's because we're going to work with doctors, teachers differently. And we're going to work and live differently. That's one statistic. We also claim that by 2020, 50 billion devices will be connected. We are going to be connected. The largest internet is not here yet, the internet of you. We are going to be the largest internet, each of us individually. And I'm going to speak to that, but it deals with healthcare. So when you think about it, do you know how many toothbrushes are sold in a year? 3.5 billion. Do you know how many cell phones are sold in a year? 6.2 billion. There are more people walking around with no access to brushes, but they have a phone. Now, we chuckle, but I want you to put this in perspective. There are kids, 18-year-old, 17-year-old, 19-year-old kids who have access to the internet without having access to clean water, electricity, and good education. That is the most damaging, dangerous trend you can ever imagine, because they have access to information that says, my life is really not worth living. So we have to fix this in a global way. And I'm going to come back and say there's a third wave of the digital economy that has kicked in, and that is where I think this Smart Regions Congress, the work that you're thinking about, should exploit, because there is a huge industry emerging that is twice the size of the first two waves that is going to be completely driven by regions such as this. And cities that we've never heard of, called Zug. Have you ever heard of a city called Zug out of Switzerland? Watch them, because they're going to dominate blockchain. It's a small little city. They've said, we're going to dominate blockchain. So the small regions are going to come up. So I'm going to start by that saying, if you had unlimited resources, unlimited computing, unlimited bandwidth, unlimited storage, would you do things differently? That means we also have to ask different questions. So the first question I would say, because we talked about traffic, is don't come up with traffic solutions. We have learned this very clearly. Don't start asking, should I use sensors? Should I use Wi-Fi? Should I use Zigbee? Should I use LoRa? Should I use narrowband IoT? Because that's the answer. But if you don't know what question you're answering, you'll probably get there just as well. So the first question to be asking is, why is there traffic? And what we know from research is that 40 to 60% of all traffic, 40 to 60% of traffic in large cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, London, 40 to 60% during the peak hours are people looking for parking spaces. If that's the case, why don't we sensorize all the parking spots, open the data up, leave it in a platform, and we talked about the multinodal mobile app here, but depending on the weather, depending on your time, and if you got there early, you might ask for a parking space that's a little bit away, saying, I want to walk for 10 minutes. And you're willing to pay differently for the parking spaces. These are these projects we're doing in New York and San Mateo and the others. It redefines the financing of parking. Let's ask a different question. By the way, this is an interesting and important. 70% of all car trips in America, 70% of all car trips in America is less than 2 miles. Less than 2 miles, 70%, according to the Department of Transportation. Suppose we had bikes, we had better public transportation, would you drive? 70% is less than 2 miles. That should be a new way of thinking as we think about it. However, a lot of our public transportation, especially in America, we have designed it for people who don't have cars. Not thinking in terms of people should use it, is designed for a class and for a mobility that says that's for them. It's like a public good as opposed to public transportation. We have to rethink that in America. I want to take healthcare, especially given the discussion we had here on opioids. This is an important statistic. Now here, coming back again to this question, we asked a different question, and this is what we did. We said, why do you need to go to a doctor? Why do you need to go to a doctor? And our research shows that for 80% of a typical doctor's consulting, the doctor himself or herself don't need to touch you. If that's the case, why not digitize the entire beds in the hospital, digitize all the instrumentation, and then use video immersive technology that is happening, and then have a complete different consultation? By the way, in America right now, there are 2 million ICU beds. 2 million, a little over 2 million ICU beds that's completely monitored out of hospitals in Chennai, in India, because of lack of access to doctors and nurses. The other thing I will say is cancer, which is one of the biggest killers. Cancers are detected 100 million cells, and usually by accident. But now with your sweat, with pills that have cameras in it, you swallow it, you can collect data that tells you cancer is emerging at 50,000 cells, which means you are 100% likely to survive, and that means cancer can be eradicated in 5 years. Now here's the interesting thing. There's not a single person here today who can tell me you're healthier today than you were yesterday. You can check your weight. All it tells you whether you have more water or less water. But you can't tell, I ate a healthy breakfast, am I healthier? I exercised yesterday and today, am I healthier today? You don't have that statistic. But now, if you imagine yourself as a body of sensors that's going to collect data and continually process and monitor it, we are going to change the entire dynamic. By the way, almost all 100% cancers are all genetic based, but only 3% to 4% of cancers are actually genetic driven. 93 to 96% are all behavioral. If I can save cancer patients, we have another problem. We're going to live longer, which means you're going to be 70, 75, 78, but you're no longer working. You're going to put a burden on the economic GDP. Japan is shrinking. By 2050, it'll be over 40% of Japan will be over the age of 65 and 20% smaller in size. Germany, the same story. Singapore, the same story. How are they going to maintain the standard of living when you don't have people working to drive money back into the economy? So there are all these multiple things we have to think about. So healthcare, education, jobs. Now I want to finish up by saying, because I got to pull over here, I suffer from stage fright. I'm afraid to get off the damn stage. So thank you for that. I'm going to end up by saying, where does this all fit with what you're trying to do here and what you could do? And this is my passion. This is what I've been going around the world saying, we need to rethink our entire managing of communities. Because you have to take a community perspective. It's not about cities. Even if you take a city, someone mentioned Cleveland this morning. So I can talk to you about all the problems in India and all the problems in Indonesia, all the problems in Africa. I can give you detail by detail of the challenges. But you don't need to go there. Go to Cleveland. That was it came out the wrong way. Go to Cleveland for the Hall of Fame, okay? For the museum. No, that's not what I meant. I should not have put a pause. This is what happens when the comma comes in the wrong place. If you go to Cleveland, between Lyndhurst and Huff, closer to Cleveland Clinic, and you take that 8-mile distance, the life expectancy of the two neighborhoods is 24 years. You drive 8 miles, and the life expectancy drops by 24 years. Get on the metro, or the tube, as they say in London, from Oxford Circus to Park Lane, life expectancy drops by 21 years in the city of London. So even in rich places, you have healthcare issues, crime issues, lack of access, lack of education, and aspirations. If you get on a train from Westminster down to Stratford Village in London, which is the Olympic Village, life expectancy at each train stop drops by 1 year. So this is a universal problem. So when we think about it, the first wave of the digital economy that created a huge industry, that created huge jobs, especially in places like India and Philippines and elsewhere, was the globalizing of IT services. 35 years ago, if you went to a large company and said, we're going to manage your IT systems globally, they would have thrown you out of the office, especially if you said India. Because the question I used to get asked when I came from India 36 years ago as a student, and I've been here 36 years, first was, are there cows on the streets of India? They don't ask me that now. When they do, I said, yeah, but they're all RFID tagged and you're monitored with Google Maps. You know where each cow is on the Google map. But so the first wave was the globalizing of IT services. Second wave, which was $1.3 trillion industry, was the globalizing of engineering services. The third wave, which has just started, which is where we could drive tremendously, is the globalizing of urban services. And that's a $4 to $5 trillion industry. There is no reason why the lights, the traffic systems, the water leaks, the hospital bed monitoring in Cincinnati could not be monitored out of here, and the ones happening in New York can be monitored out of this area, and the stuff happening in Europe can be monitored out of this region. There's no reason why you cannot manage the lights of Madrid. Madrid has already outsourced that completely to a company called Ferrovial. Ferrovial could set up an entire operations here, monitoring all the lights in Spain, saying, we'll monitor it from here, because there's a small startup out of Tel Aviv that is monitoring the water leakages of Singapore and Adelaide. So this, if you look at water management, traffic lights, parking, police securities, you can manage that remotely, and including hospitals can be managed increasingly from a remote location. If that's the case, smaller regions become extraordinarily attractive because quality of life is great, jobs are here, and you can redefine. So think region, but think global in delivery. The next IBM is not yet built. The next Accenture has not yet been built. And to do that, you need 5 things. So I'm going to end by saying political will, political leadership is the only way you're going to get started. That's what I look for. Because you can't do this because you have to change some of the underlying principles of the way governments are run. Second is global standards. And I'm not talking IT. There are no global standards for parking sizes. There are no global standards for water. There are no global standard for disaster. No 2 cities in the same state are following the same standards. How are you going to build technology solutions if you don't have standards? No standards for lighting poles, for light fixtures. Those are the things we have to work on, not just EEE. Standards for technology and telecom. Third, smart regulations. You ever heard about the new campus that Apple is building? $5 billion fabulous space. They got 14,000 employees. They need 11,000 parking spaces because of a government regulation of Cupertino based on size of the area and number of employees. They don't take into account carpooling, public transportation, remote access, but you need 11,000 parking spaces or you don't get building permits. I can improve the water consumption, but the standards for getting in-ground, in-retention times in a building like this is based on the old standards of 50 years ago. We need smarter regulations. Public-private partnerships. And that means it's not just about public practice or government and private, but also labor unions. I didn't hear the word labor union. I heard academic institution. But unless you get the police unions and the drivers unions, nothing is going to happen. They need to look at it as job creation, not as job loss. Every time a camera comes up, that doesn't mean you're going to have 1 less police officer. You have to create new jobs. A police officer sitting in this region could be monitoring things and helping the policemen in Jakarta. They are looking for that service. But that means we need new financial models, new funding models. It cannot be 30-year concession plans. 30-year concession plans on a technology where we don't know where 10 years from now the technology is going. How are you going to build a plan around it? And the last one, which is the most important, and I'm going to quit at that, which is unless you have local innovation ecosystem, you're not going to build a smart region because global players like me don't understand your region. I can build a horizontal platform that enables solutions. We can enable solutions, but the solution has to be built locally by people who understand local stuff, and you create new local startups, and those local startups should treat the region as a living lab, and from that living lab, you create a global firm and a global industry. Thank you. I'm sorry I've gone over my time. Thank you. Sorry, Zach.